compare yourself to who you are, because as soon as you start comparing yourself to others, then you lose who you are. You want to be like somebody else. Well, why? You don't know what that person's been through. You've never walked a mile in that person's shoes. You don't know the issues that person has to deal with every single day. But you know where you were yesterday, and you know who and where you are today.
Sean Swarner, his entire journey, his entire story was that the human body can go without food for 30 days. We can go without water for 3 days. But man, we cannot go without hope for 30 seconds. And he brings nothing but hope to the lives and to the minds, and more importantly to me, to the hearts of anyone that he comes into contact with. Welcome to the Empowered Life Podcast. My name is Rudi Ricksteins, and I like to start episodes off with a bang. And I typically start off saying, man, do we have an incredible podcast episode for you today? And so today I'm going to start off by saying, man, do we have an incredible podcast episode for you today? There are always these moments in life, I think, that really define you, where you're going, what your life looks like, and brings a level of accountability and ownership to what you're experiencing, and then supports you in bridging those things that have held you back, the setbacks you've had, the situations and circumstances that you've processed, and turning them into something that empowers you and then propels you forward in life. I had the privilege of meeting this incredible man who I'm going to be introducing you to in a few moments' time, and watching him speak on stage. And I sat in the audience and I was breathless, literally holding my breath as parts of his story came out and how he shared and the vantage point that he had. And something that I really took away from his entire journey, his entire story, was that the human body can go without food for 30 days. We can go without water for 3 days. But man, we cannot go without hope for 30 seconds. And he brings nothing but hope to the lives and to the minds, and more importantly to me, to the hearts of anyone that he comes into contact with. This man has lived 10 lifetimes in just one lifetime. And I just want to ground right now today that every single thing that has ever happened in his life has so beautifully, so perfectly prepared him for the man that he has become and gets to be, and then gives other people permission to be. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, Sean Swarner. I'm so excited to have you come and join the show, man. Thank you so much.
Rudi, after that intro, I'm sitting here thinking, wow, that's a crazy intro, and I'm really grateful to be here. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Oh my gosh, man. I just have to tell you, I am just so blown away by your story. You are a gentle giant. In your demeanor. You seem so calm and quiet and reserved, and you take a seat and you're so well poised. And then when you start speaking, it's like this ferocious, powerful man comes out that can just do no wrong. And I was just so floored by you, by your story. And for anyone that hasn't yet come across you, I am just really excited to get to be the person to get to introduce them to today. You do bring hope out and into the world, and you've had such a profound journey. I'd like to start off by just talking a little bit about what you've accomplished right now. And then I want to go back to, how did we end up getting there? Because most people, when they meet someone, they meet the person they are today, they meet the person they are now. And we don't always have access to or privy to the entire journey of what has been your entire life. I mean, we were talking right before we hit record today, and just the things that you've done and the things that you've achieved is just totally awe-inspiring. And I would love for you to please make sure that you elaborate here, because I know that there's no way I could ever do justice on every single accolade that you have achieved. You have climbed every single major peak, all 7 peaks, including Mount Everest. You have gone to the South Pole. You have trekked the North Pole. In addition to that, you have climbed, and you were just sharing with me a few moments' time, in Tanzania, you have gone up, and the peak was Mount Kilimanjaro, and you went
Correct.
24 times. You've been doing it every single year. You are a best-selling author. You have got a TV series out that's a documentary on Amazon, and that is called True North. You are just inspiring and moving people with what it is that you've done and achieved in such an incredibly short amount of time. But I always like to start off by saying we weren't always this way. So I'd like to go back to when you were a child. I'd like to go back to around about the age of 14, playing basketball. Tell us a little bit about what was happening in your life at that time, and then what was the big, profound shift that created the momentum for you to become the man that you've become today.
I definitely appreciate all that, and it's kind of funny when you mention all those things I've accomplished, and going back, and I'll get to that answer in a second. But you mentioned climbing Kilimanjaro 24 times. There are some nights, some years where I did it back to back, and we always go on a safari. And I remember there was a lady who was on the safari. She was bragging about being a self-published author. She was bragging about this. She was bragging about that. And one of the other people in the safari truck with us looked at her and she goes, one of the things that I really love about Sean is that you would never know what he's accomplished and what he's done unless you ask. And she was quiet the rest of the trip. And you're right. I try to be a very humble person because of my beginnings, because of where I've been in my life, and because of what I've seen, which we'll get to. And I've taken what I've done and hopefully empowered other people around the world. But the thing is, we all have stories to tell. We all have a different perspective on life. And it all comes from where we come from. Each individual. You were telling me that you were from South Africa. The way you were born and raised was different than the way I was born and raised. I was born and raised in a small town in Ohio, population 5,000 people. And I'm pretty sure now it might be a population of 5,003. Nothing really much changes in the Midwest. But going back to your question there, I remember growing up in that small town where my backyard was a bean field or a cornfield, depending on the season. My dad was the local dentist, and oftentimes people couldn't afford his services. So because we were a farming community, other people would pay him in vegetables. We would have fresh vegetables year round. So maybe that's why I never didn't like broccoli when I was a kid growing up. I always loved the vegetables. But I was a completely normal Midwest young man until I suffered a knee injury, and that knee injury changed my life forever. And most people, when they're growing up, they think about, being in the eighth grade for maybe freshman year in high school, and they're worried about having their books knocked out of their hands, or where their next class is. If they're going to make it in time before the bell rings, and they get marked off as tardy or late. Or they're worried about the where they're going to sit at lunch. Imagine fighting for your life day in, day out, every evening when you go to bed. You're terrified to close your eyes because you don't know if they're going to open the next morning or not, because you now have advanced 4th-stage Hodgkin's lymphoma. And I remember waking up one morning about 3 or 4 months into the treatment. I knew it was going to happen. I knew I was going to lose my hair because the chemotherapy doesn't target the cancer specifically. It actually destroys rapidly dividing cells, which is what our hair and our nails and things like that are. So that's why your hair falls out during chemo. And I remember waking up one morning and looking into the mirror in the bathroom. And at this point, I was 60, 70 pounds overweight, and I really couldn't recognize who I was. There was nothing left of who I used to be. I was a competitive swimmer. I ran track. I played football. The coach wanted me to do basketball, but I was so much into swimming, it didn't work out with the timing of the year and the season. But when I looked at myself in the mirror, being 60 or 70 pounds overweight, I was absolutely helpless and hopeless. There was a shell of who I was before. There was no longer this confident athlete. There was this obese troll in my eyes, where I belonged underneath a bridge, and I was afraid and scared for my life. And I remember going into the shower and on my hands and knees sobbing. Yeah, I had nothing left. My hair fell out while I was there. 20 minutes in the shower before the water started getting cold. And I remember that the water was filling up in the shower floor because there was so much hair in the drain, clogging it up. So I remember pulling the chunks of hair out of the drain, just weeping. But I also realized that I had two choices in my life. I could, at that moment, I could either fight for my life or give up and die. And the second was not an option. I think one thing that really kept me going was fast forwarding, say, a couple weeks later, and I imagined what my parents' life, what their lives would look like, and how they would feel if they lost their firstborn son. I couldn't do that to them.
I want to ground something for a moment. The most difficult and painful experience of my childhood was roughly the same age that you were. And I was 13 years old. I grew up in a really small town. We had 18 kids in my class, and 5 of the guys were my best friends, and we'd known each other our entire lives. And all of a sudden, one Monday morning, I walk into school, I sit next to my friend, every day looked like any other day, and something had changed. They started ignoring me. They started picking on me. They started sticking notes on my back saying, kick him, or he smells, and there was a shift. And the people that I had known in my life turned on me. My closest friends turned on me. And I became angry. I became resentful. I became guarded. And that was a terrible week of my life, of going home and feeling unworthy and pushed out and not enough and not good enough. And it created a tremendous amount of angst and emotion in me. And I remember lying on the couch on a Saturday morning, the following Saturday, and my mom came to me and said, "This has to stop now. Like, this is not okay. Like, you have got to get up off the couch." And that was such a defining point in my life. She called every one of the mothers and told the mothers what was happening. And Monday morning, magically, when I got back to school, everybody was my friend again, except I didn't go back to who I was. And that, to me, is such a silly example of these moments that define us and who we become. And when you were talking on stage about being 14 years old, playing basketball, injuring your knee, the injury then revealed the diagnosis of cancer, and you having this whole world get whipped around. And then I had that lens of, are you kidding me, Rudi? You didn't have your friends talk to you for a week, and you were lying on a couch and you were debilitated and you were so scared and so sad. And that was such a defining moment in your life. And here you've got Sean standing on stage talking about what it was like to be fighting for his life. And that really shifted something in me in hearing you and the value of each person's life experience. But what really resonated so deeply with me in your mission and your story is that you repeatedly say, you have overcome cancer, but you're still fighting, and that you're fighting for other people. And you've got that burning desire in you to impact, inspire, and bring hope to people where they don't have hope. But what I'm so in awe of in how you have shifted is that at 14 years old, you said, I'm not going to focus on dying. I'm going to focus on living. And you used the words that just rang so deep in me that you had a choice to make. You could either focus on the avoidance of what you don't want, or you could focus on living your life. And I just wish that I had that voice in my head when I was 13 years old and 14 and 15 and 16. I would love to know, what do you believe gave you the ability to receive a death diagnosis, and then still have the ability to turn around and say, I'm not going to focus on what I don't want. I'm going to focus on what I do want, and then become that person that started taking action at that age?
Well, first of all, I don't want what you just said to zip by without acknowledging that. So thank you so much for sharing. And I don't think it's silly that you felt that way, because we're all coming from a different perspective. That's your reality. That was your mountain at the time. And when you look at other people going through their trauma, their issues, others need to look at it from a completely non-judgmental standpoint. Not every, we'll get to this, but not everyone's going to climb Everest, but we all have an Everest to climb. And each person has different expectations of life. People have a different idea of what resilience is, and different monumental and life-changing events that happen in our lives So if that was yours and that's what helped shape who you are, fantastic, man. Hold on to that. That's great. One thing I learned going through these cancers is you never compare yourself to someone else. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday. Compare yourself to who you are, because as soon as you start comparing yourself to others, then you lose who you are. You want to be like somebody else? Well, why? You don't know what that person's been through. You've never walked a mile in that person's shoes. You don't know the issues that person has to deal with every single day. But you know where you were yesterday, and you know who and where you are today. So, like I said, I wanted to mention that and just say thank you. I appreciate that. And going back to the question on regarding focusing on not focusing on the avoidance of something, but going after something I wanted. Oftentimes, and even in the situation you were in, you can't control the situation, but you always have a choice in how you react to it. And I think when you're at an age of 13, 14, eighth grade, freshman year in high school, you have hormones kicking in, you're growing hair in strange places on your body. You're wondering, where is this coming from? And it becomes a different perspective because you're no longer worried about certain things, and you start focusing on what you can control. And in that moment, what I could control was my mind. The cancer could riddle my body, but it could never touch my mind. It might even touch my brain, but it'll never touch my mind. And I realized at such a young age that I am always the one who's in control. Do I get upset? Oh, all the time. Driving down the road, somebody cuts me off. I say a few choice 4-letter words, but I get over it pretty quickly. But I always try to do what I can to remain in control. And I learned that at such a young age, because if I get angry about something, how's it going to help? People throw things and break things. Great. 20 minutes later, you realize, oh man, I shouldn't have done that. Take a deep breath. Things are always going to get better. And I realized that because every night I would go to bed, I would be thankful for what I had, and I wouldn't look at what I didn't.
So here's what makes your story so incredible. 13 years old, you get this diagnosis and you go through treatment, your body balloons, you change the shape. You described yourself a moment ago as looking in the mirror and seeing this ogre that should be living under a bridge, and you go through all of this turmoil. You have spoken about previously, you lost your friends, you lost your identity of going to school and being this boy that's body's changing, and it should be puberty, except yours is changing in a completely different way. And then you heal, and then again at 16 years old you're diagnosed again. Tell us what was going through your mind when you got that diagnosis.
In all honesty, I was like, shit, again? Like, I just went through this once. Why? Instantly, I kind of looked up. I call him the big guy upstairs. Like, what did I do to deserve this? Why me? Why again? What didn't I learn the first time that I have to go through it again? My whole world shattered. In fact, in one day, I remember I was in complete remission from the first cancer. I was NED, no evidence of disease. And the way that works is when I was placed in remission, I would go in every 3 months for a checkup, and then they wanted to bump it to every 6 months for a checkup. We decided, hey, how about 4? And if we would have gone with a 6, I wouldn't be standing here right now, because I was diagnosed with such an aggressive tumor. When they found it in one day for the checkup, they did a needle biopsy. They found on an X-ray. They found the tumor. They took out a lymph node from my neck. They put in a permanent IV called a Hickman catheter. They cracked open my ribs, removed the tumor, put a drainage tube in, and started chemotherapy in less than one day. And this time around, they diagnosed me with something called Askin sarcoma, which is so rare. The doctors gave me a 14-day expiration date. So if we would have waited to the 6-month period, I wouldn't have made it. But when I first got diagnosed, I tried not to be hopeless, but just like anything, you go up and down and up and down and up and down. If I told you I was positive 100% of the time, I'd be lying. I sometimes, when I look in the mirror, even now, years and years later, I sometimes still see that chubby, overweight ogre. I still see what I went through, and that's really difficult. But the second time around, I didn't want to do it again. What did I do wrong to get it?
You described that feeling of, are you kidding me? Not again. Like, what is it that I have to go through in this moment that I didn't learn the first time, that I have to do it the second time? And now I just want to bring our audience along for the entirety of this journey. You were given 14 days to live. You had not one, but two cancers. They were so unique, so rare that they gave you an unbelievable odds of actually surviving this. And I may butcher this, and feel free to correct me. It was a 1 in 4 billion chance. Is that correct?
I would say it's 1 in 8 billion because I'm the only person in history who's ever had Hodgkin's and Askin sarcoma. In fact, the chances of me surviving both cancers is roughly the equivalent of winning the lottery 4 times in a row with the same numbers.
It is just insane, absolutely
So,
insane. And so I'm
yeah,
imagining at 16 years old, hearing that, having already gone through what you had gone through, and now you're being challenged and tasked with, I'm not going to focus on the avoidance of what I don't want. I want to focus on what I do want. But you've been given every single odd stacked against you, and yet you still went into fighting. I know that you had spent the majority of a year in a coma, and the treatment was extremely aggressive. There was almost no chance, no probability of you making it. And yet here you are today. Tell us a little bit about what that entire experience it has served you to become the man that you've become today, and why you feel so tasked to be this champion of hope for people around the world.
well, if you look at, let's say, professional athletes, they have some, and even Olympic athletes, they have tremendous mindsets and focus on their goals. And let's say there's a quote, I think it was Michael Jordan. He said, "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take." Right? It's the same thing when life knocks you down. Get back up. Why are you going to focus on the things that went wrong? Obviously it's in a much grander scale and much more serious, but why are you going to sit there and focus on all the stuff that you don't have, all the stuff that went wrong? You're going to literally program your brain to be negative. You're going to start picking out all these little things and these little details you don't like, as opposed to appreciating the sunrise and the smell of the flowers when you're on a walk. You're going to look at it and say, "Oh yeah, but there's so much smog coming off of Denver right now from all the cars." Like, just stop it. Focus on the good stuff. And I want people to realize this isn't a dress rehearsal, and unless you're my friends from Nepal who believe in reincarnation, this is it. I don't want to have any what if questions. I'm visiting my grandma in a week, 2 weeks. She's turning 101 years old. Do you think she ever said, "Oh, I wish I worked harder"? No, absolutely not. I wish I traveled more. I wish I saw this more. I wish I spent more time outside. I wish I walked more. Her knees are starting to fail her at 101. Understandable. Going through two cancers and the prognoses that I've had, you develop a different perspective on life. So when people start complaining about these mundane things, just let it roll off your back. Pretend like you're made of Teflon when people bark orders and other things at you. It makes no sense. So my life now is dedicated to helping others see in themselves what others might see in them that they don't. When I see someone, I do a lot of work with corporate folks. I do a lot of work with corporations and did give keynote presentations around the world. And it never fails where someone comes up and they say, "Oh, it's a great story." I'm like, "Well, I appreciate that, but what about yours?" Like, "Oh, well, I couldn't do this. I couldn't do that." Like, why not? Like, what's holding you back? For some people, I would say for most people, they need to see something's possible before they believe they can do it. I'm the complete opposite, where I believe I can do it. I see it in my mind, complete believer in vivid visualization, and I make it happen. We'll get to it, but climbing Everest with one lung, people thought that was physiologically impossible. But to quote someone that you probably know very well from where you came from, he said, "It always seems impossible until it's done."
You dropped my next leading point, which was you just climbed Mount Everest. You've been to every one of the top 7 peaks, Kilimanjaro 24 times and continuing to go because it's part of a charity organization that you champion. And you've done that with one lung. Now, I know you have 2 lungs, but your one lung was so damaged from the gamma rays that it no longer functions. And still, you went ahead and did something that requires tremendous levels of oxygen. So, our audience, I love to bring them in behind the curtain. Right before we got onto the call today, I was outside in my backyard sitting in an ice plunge. And so I do ice immersion every single day. And there I am sitting at, 45 degrees was the temperature of the water this morning, 3 minutes shivering, climbing out, doing star jumps, just to warm up and get blood back into my fingers. That's 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. And then we get onto this call and I take my thick jacket off because I'm still shivering and I drop it down right before we hit record. And then I get onto the call with you and we're talking about, oh, well, it was 80 degrees below freezing. And these are the conditions we're in. And then I was thinking back to my cold immersion. And then my mind went back to Rudi being 13 years old and looking at how hard his life was and how hard his cold plunge was. And then I look at the life you're living and you constantly push the envelope when it comes to what is it like for a human being, let alone a human being that's a 2-time cancer survivor, let alone a human being who has 1 functioning lung. I mean, just the level of drive that you have and what you're showing of what's possible. What was it that made you wake up one day and say, I'm going to climb Mount Everest and then every other peak, and then I'm going to go to the North Pole, I'm going to go to the South Pole, and I'm going to show people what's possible and become a champion for survivors? What was that thing that said, oh, I'm going to go and push myself to the extreme?
First of all, that cold plunge, I have no desire to do that. I joined the Polar Bear Club once in Estes Park, Colorado on New Year's Day, where I literally had to chip through the ice to get in there. And then I jumped back into the car. I had the heater on, blasting. My feet were on fire because it was so, no way. So I get it. I know there are health benefits, but when you're out in the cold temperatures, 80 below, going to the North Pole, you don't have a super long extension cord connected to somewhere in Canada to turn on a heater. So you hop into your tent and you try to warm up, which I'm assuming where you're sitting right now is fairly warm. But no, thank you. I like I said, I know people do it all the time. I have zero desire. I'm done. No, thank you. But I don't know if there was a short moment or thing that happened to me, but I do have a story that is after I graduated college, I was in Jacksonville, Florida, when I initially came up with this idea to climb Everest. And the highest point in Florida is the top of the Four Seasons Hotel in Miami. Right. So that's why I moved to Colorado. But while I was there, I was working on my master's and my doctorate in psychology. I was going to be a psychologist for cancer patients. And one of the jobs I had was bartending at the largest club in Jacksonville on the beach. And I remember I was flipping drinks just like cocktail. I was blowing fire. I thought I was hot, you know what. And there was this young lady who came up and across the bar, she says, can I have sex on the beach and your phone number? And inside, I'm thinking, yes, this is fantastic. I'm hooking up tonight. But then outside, I was just like, yeah, cool, no problem. So I kept feeding her drinks all night long. And this happened, I don't know how many times throughout the night, but eventually she came up and she flops down on the bar stool, and she looks at me, she goes, my friends left me. Can you take me home? And inside, again, I'm thinking to myself, this is awesome. Yes, absolutely. I'll take you home. But on the outside, I try to play it cool. And I said, yeah, no problem. So we get into my super sexy and inexpensive Honda Civic, and we start going up over the bridge over the intercoastal. And on the way down from the passenger side, I hear, ooh, ooh. Obviously she's trying to get rid of whatever demons inside of her. I pull over as quickly as I possibly can, get the door open. She vomits everything out and passes out. Thankfully, I got her address of where she lived and where we were going before that happened. And I remember pulling up to the apartment complex, walking around the Honda Civic, opening up the door, and just picking this girl up in my arms and carrying her 3 flights up. And with this lifeless limp of a human being, I kick the door. I have no idea who's behind 3F. I'm just banging it with my foot, and some little girl opens the door, and a little girl meaning, short. And I just shoved this other one into her face. I'm like, does she belong to you? And she goes, again? Like, got it. So I take her inside. I drop her off on the papasan chair, like one of those round chairs. And as I was leaving, on the table, the coffee table, I saw lines of cocaine, heroin needles, burnt spoons, pills. And I got back into my car, and on my way home, it was a real hard, literal and proverbial look in the mirror. Where is my life going? Like, what am I doing right now? Where's the moral and ethical Midwest boy that my mom and dad raised? Now I'm dealing with people who are doing all sorts of drugs, and I'm trying to hook up with who knows who she's been with before. This is not me. So I dropped out of school the next day. I took a sabbatical from working on my master's as a doctor. I never earned my doctorate degree or my master's. But it was in that time when I stopped and I took that hard look in the mirror that I hope everybody does at some point, because you have to figure out who you are, and what you value. That's when I realized I wanted to give back to the cancer community and give back to others by literally using the largest platform, the highest platform in the world, to give other people hope.
What would you say is the one message that you want everybody to take from what has been your incredible life so far and apply it to their lives?
I would tell people to figure out and utilize what your personal core values are, to find your specific route to the top of whatever peak you're climbing. Utilize what you value most to excel in every facet of life, to figure out how you want to do it. Be an individual based on what you value most.
So you've climbed all 7 of the tallest peaks. You have done many of them repeatedly, and you've gone to both the South Pole, and then you went to the North Pole, and you achieved something that no one else has ever achieved. And under conditions, I want to add, that no one's ever been able to achieve them. And so you set a goal in your mind, I'm going to climb Everest, and then you climbed Everest, and then you set your mind, I'm going to do this, and then you did that, and then you just kept going. And now that you've achieved all of them, you've got to the peak, you've got to the very end of what it is that you were chasing. What was the feelings that you've had? Is that like, now you need to chase something else? Was there more to it, or was it disappointing all the way at the top after having gone through the entire process?
Everest was phenomenal. I mean, reaching the summit, I was in tears of happiness. But within the same breath of, as I'm shedding these tears, I looked around and I thought to myself, well, I'm only halfway. I have to get back down. Right? I had this vivid visualization, and I pictured myself taking the last few steps to the top for months every single night. I never pictured myself having to turn around and go back down. So when I reached the summit of Everest, I realized that I was only halfway. But then after reaching the North Pole, which was the culmination of the Explorer's Grand Slam, is what it's called, the 7 summits and the 2 poles, believe it or not, I was depressed for a while, because I put so much time and effort into a goal, and I put so much focus on the completion of that goal. It's very similar to going through the cancers where the doctor said, hey, Sean, you're in remission. My friends were happy. My girlfriend at the time was happy. Now my fiance here is happy that I made it to the North Pole. And now my wife, everybody was ecstatic that the goal was accomplished. Looking at the cancer, everyone was super happy. Sean's in remission. That's fantastic. He has the rest of his life to go live. My first thought was not, woohoo, hey, I'm in remission, I got my whole life ahead of me. It was, what do I do now? Where do I even put that first step? How do I even figure out where I want to go? So it was similar going to the North Pole. I finished after, how many years of trying to reach these amazing accomplishments. I get there and it's over. I was depressed. But then I realized now, looking back at it, I spent so much time trying to reach these goals and so little time at those goals. Everest took me a month and a half to climb. I was on the summit for 20 minutes. I learned more about myself in that month and a half than I did on at the 20 minutes at the top. People need to realize that it's all about the journey, not the destination. People are so focused on the new car, the raise, the new house, whatever it might be. Slow down and enjoy it, but focus on why you're trying to reach those goals. Tap back into your personal core values, because when you reach the summit of that peak, there are going to be other mountains to climb. When you cross that finish line, there are going to be other races to run. Enjoy what you have now. Enjoy the journey and make it last.
That has been a reoccurring theme throughout your entire life of not focusing on the avoidance of what you don't want, focusing on being present in this moment. And you have dropped so many unbelievably powerful, life altering truths on the podcast today. You had said before we hit record, I just want this to be the best podcast that you've ever recorded. I want this to add so much value. And man, have you lived up to that? Because if we just stop comparing ourselves, your words, stopped comparing ourselves to anybody else and just compared us to ourselves, and then ask, how can I live my best life today? And then not focus on what we don't want, the avoidance of what we don't want, focus on what we do want, and then live that life. And for somebody who has climbed and achieved just the impossible, going to all 7 peaks, going to the South Pole, going to the North Pole, achieving the Grand Slam, and then saying, there's still more mountains to climb. And that is the value of what it is we're doing, because they're not building more literal mountains. But in life, we have these moments, we have these things that feel like mountains, feel impossible, feel like we're never going to get to the other end of it. And then we do magically get the 20 minutes on the top of the summit. And then we get to, navigate the next part of that journey. What is next for you, Sean?
Well, the next big adventure, I suppose, like I said, I recently got married. I've heard from numerous people that's more difficult than climbing Everest. And she knows I tell that joke. I said it once at a conference, because a guy mentioned, after I said, well, I recently got married, he goes, that's more difficult than climbing Everest.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
um, the next challenge, well, a friend of mine, I don't know if I should call him a friend anymore, but just last week signed me up for a 100-mile bike race. I'm going to sign up for RAM, which is Race Across America. It's a bike race across America. In 2025, my goal is to potentially go back to Everest and attempt it without supplemental oxygen in my one lung. But the biggest challenge I have now is really reaching as many people as I can and sharing the insights that I've learned by accomplishing what no one else in history has. And it's to help them understand that this journey is more than just transforming a mindset. It's about delving deep into yourself and learn to tackle challenges the proper way, and learn to thrive among life's fluctuations. Nurture a resilience while you continue going after whatever it might be in your life. And that boils back down to personal core values. Why are you doing it? Why, not necessarily why are you here, but why are you going after what you're going after?
So you had shared with me before we hit record that you are in the process of launching some tools to be able to support people in their mental stability, health, and well-being, to be able to take the tools and practices of what you've put into your life and give it to people in a way that they can digest it. Why don't you share a little bit about what you're working on?
Absolutely. It's what I've called a 3-week mental wellness challenge. It's not a superficial, relaxation thing. It equips you with the proper mental tools needed to excel in every facet of life. And it came about from 2 different things. One, after a keynote presentation, people would always come up and say, that's a great story. But there'd be a handful of people who would continue it by saying, how did you do it? So that planted the seed. And I started thinking about how I literally, my first goal was to crawl 8 feet from the hospital bed to the bathroom. And then I went on to climb the highest mountains in the world. So there had to have been some logical progression that I made. And then looking at Kilimanjaro, the average success rate on Kilimanjaro is 48%. 52 out of 100 people don't make it. The groups that I've taken up there, hundreds of people over the past 24 trips up, we're at 99% success rate.
Wow.
So we have to be doing something differently. And that's where this whole challenge comes into play. It combined what I learned and what I've taught people on the mountain. Because when I'm leading on the mountain, I'm never out front unless it's dangerous. Say, hey, put your foot here, put your hand here. I don't want you to die. But for the most part, I'm leading from behind, empowering others to go figure it out and go check it out themselves. Remove the ego, help other people. Because once you get to the top of any peak and you're there by yourself, yeah, you're sitting there on the summit watching the sunrise, self high five. Big deal. You have no one to celebrate it with. It's meaningless. So when you're up there, pull other people up to the top and help them become empowered to go on and do amazing things themselves.
I knew that this podcast would be one of the best podcasts, and not because you set the intention before we hit record, but because your story speaks so beautifully into what is our core fundamental belief in the Empowered Life podcast. And that is that we have all of the power within us to have and to be and to do and to achieve anything that we desire. And I have not lived your life experience, but having the privilege of knowing you, meeting you, listening to you, conversing with you, and just taking the value of what was your experience and what you've done with that. I don't hear your story and think, wow, what a great story. I hear you talk about your life and I think, what an incredible, robust life that you were living and continue to live, and that you're giving permission to so many people to do the same. And for so many people that are sitting in a cubicle right now and they're unhappy with their life, man, what can they do to create that shift or that change? Because it could be just an 8 feet worth of crawling to get to something that's going to be better than where they're at. Or it could be making a relationship change or a job change or a health change. And then just applying those steps and not looking at all of the things that other people put on us. So many people in life hear something and then that formulates their entire identity. You heard, man, you've got this cancer and no one's had it, and you might die, and this is really serious, and you've got a year, and then you come back from it, and then you get another one. Oh man, you've got 14 days to live. So many people would say, oh well, I had a good run. Let's make these 14 days count. And or turn inward and feel debilitated in just that in itself. But something inside you said, no, man, I want more. I want to do more. I want to achieve more. And yes, there were ups and yes, there were downs, because that is life. Life is ups and downs. But every turn, you were anchored in doing something greater than you, and then turning around and sharing it and teaching it. You didn't have to go to Everest, and you didn't have to become a champion for cancer survivors to show people what's possible, because it's true. People do need to know what's possible. But we would never achieve anything if we didn't have champions that said, hey, the impossible can be possible if I'm the one that's going to bring that to the finish line. And so I just want to commend you. And I just want to thank you for everything that you're doing. I'm going to put your book in the show notes. I'm going to put your link to your Amazon documentary that you've got, True North, into the show notes. I'm going to put your website in. I'm going to encourage people to just find you, follow you, and then just to connect with you in any way. If you've got the link available for the program that you're launching, I would love to be able to put that into the show notes, because the world right now is looking to people to show them what's possible. And I think that you are the crowning example of what does that look like to live a life of absolute purpose. Sean, I am just so, so proud of you. I said that before we hit record today. I'm proud of that 13-year-old boy that said, I want more. I'm proud of that 16-year-old boy that didn't take the debilitating knock on the chin and feel beaten down. And then I want to just tell you, I'm just so proud of you for every single moment when you were out in the cold, chugging and pushing and, taking that extra step in that moment when you didn't want to, when you didn't have to, and doing it for a cause that's bigger than you. And then just showing all of us, what does it look like to live your life so beautifully and so abundantly. And I think that's why you are able to walk into a room and be this calm and gentle giant, because you know who you are. You're not trying to show people who you are. You're not trying to validate who you are. You've always known who you are. And I think that's just such an incredible, incredible quality. And I'm just so grateful. I have one closing question for you. And I would love to know if there is one book that you have read in your life that changed your life, added value in your life in one way. what would that one book be?
It's weird because I had three pop to my mind instantly, and they all popped in at the same time. Um, One was the Bible, and I'm not a very religious person. I'm very spiritual, but I know there's a lot of really good stuff in the Bible. Another one is Leveling Up by a friend of mine, Alvaro Nunez. And the other one is in my closet behind me. And it's probably, yes, that's it. It's called The Dash. And I don't know if you know what that book's about, but it's a poem, and it relates how when you're born until you die, that's your dash. Like everyone's trying to race through life. It's your dash. So what can you do to slow down and get more meaning from it?
I love that. Would you like to add any sound bites as to the other two references that you gave?
Um, well, Level Up, it really, well, obviously aside from my book, but I'm not going to promote my own book. Level Up has really taken me to the next step where I can learn to be unstoppable. And then the Bible has just given me that peace and insight into myself, because the relationship I have with the big guy upstairs is more of a personal relationship than anything else. And I know that he's already given me everything I need.
And that is the perfect way to close out our Empowered Life podcast. You have everything within you to be who you came here to be. All of what has happened to you in your life is serving you for the moment that you're going to have next. Sean, you show up in every moment as just the most incredible example of what is possible. I'm so grateful for you joining us on the Empowered Life podcast. Thank you so much to everybody listening. We'll catch you on the next episode of the Empowered Life.